So we're having all kinds of fun today, but what I want to talk about today is the power steering issues on the 2003 to 2007 Super Duties. Some of the trucks have a problem where you'll lose your brake assist and your steering assist, mainly the steering assist. You'll be going down the road and you'll pull up to a stop, and all of a sudden you'll realize you don't have any power assist with your steering, and then it'll actually come and go. A little while later it'll come back, and then it'll quit again. And sometimes they get bad enough to where if you hit the brake pedal enough times, you'll lose it, and it'll come back, and it'll be intermittent. So first of all, we can talk about how this system works. So it's a hydro boost on the brakes. You got your power steering pump. The pressure comes right into the hydro boost, and then it feeds the hydro boost piston. There's this spool valve in here that directs the fluid to give you your brake assist, and then there's a bypass on here for the fluid to bypass. So it goes from there. Out of there it goes down to the box. So you got pressure that goes through the hydro boost, out of the hydro boost, down to your steering box, and then it comes out of the steering box, goes down through your steering cooler and back into the reservoir, out the return side of the box. So you're going through the box, through the cooler, back to the reservoir, and then your return on your booster goes back to the reservoir. So you've got two returns on this system. So what happens is, especially when they get a little wear on them, the spool valve in here gets worn out, and it's spring loaded, but it'll actually stick. This one here will actually stick in here if you kind of jack it around a little bit. There's a piece of linkage on here that hooks on this lever in here, and this is your input piston here for your booster. When you push the brake pedal, that comes out, and this little lever here operates your spool valve, and puts pressure, gives you your assist pressure to your booster. So what happens if this sticks in the wrong position, you won't be sending fluid down to your power steering box. It'll all be coming out the return here. And the way that you can figure that out if you don't have gauges is, this is the reservoir on one of these trucks from 2005 to 2007. You can pull, let's see, this sits in here, sits in there like that. So the return on the front is the return coming out of the box, and the return on the back, this bolts up against the fender like this, is the one coming out of the booster. So what I usually do is I'll draw the fluid down in this, a little bit below both of these return nipples here, and then you can look down in there and get it to have the problem. And what you'll notice is you won't have any return coming out of your cooler, out of your steering box. You can look down in there and you can see the fluid coming out. So that pretty much tells you that you don't have that pressure going down to the box. You may have return out of your brake booster, and there may be some assist on your brakes, but you won't have it at the steering box. So the booster is wore out, and the booster needs to be replaced. I know I've changed in the past. I've changed a couple of power steering boxes, and you go drive it and it's like, what the heck? And that's basically because it wasn't properly diagnosed. So the booster is an integral part of the steering power assist system. So you can't forget that this is needs to be factored in, because the first place the pump hits is the booster. So this is where your pressure is coming to, and if you have a pressure loss going to your power steering box, that's the first thing you need to check your return on your steering box and see if it's not all returning right out of the booster, because the spool valve's sticking. So anyway, onward and upward. So we have a 2006 F450. It came in here as a no start. So the first thing I did, you know, I want to scan for codes and look at some data, look at FICM data, see if I have cam crank sync, you know, that kind of stuff. And pulled the data up, you know, looked at it, everything looked normal, cranking looks normal, except I didn't have any injection control pressure. So I scanned it for codes, and I had a glow plug number 3 code, which wouldn't keep it from starting, and then I think it was a P2291, which is injection control pressure low while cranking. So, you know, the first thing I did was I came out here and I'll pull the ICP sensor out and do an air check and see if we have any leaks in our high pressure system. And I'm using roughly 150 psi of air pressure, and generally it's enough for you to hear a leak if you do have a leak. And I checked it for a leak, toggled the regulator, the IPR, you know, close it up, and I don't hear any leaks in the high pressure system. So the next thing that I'm going to do here, I haven't done it yet, but because I have my suspicions, is I'm going to check my low pressure oil system and see if I have base oil pressure. When I was cranking it, I forgot to look at the dash to see if the gauge would come up, you know, while cranking it. And I was just cranking on this thing about 10 minutes ago. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the filter and you know, look inside there and see if our oil, you know, if we're drawing oil out of the oil pan. And I did check the oil, of course. So we'll pull this filter off real quick. Filter, it's dry. I mean, the drain back valve in there could be leaking, but I mean, I was just cranking on this and I have no oil on it, so it's bone dry. That's not a good sign. So we'll bump the starter over here and see if we get any oil in our oil filter housing. The oil comes directly from the oil pump. It comes directly up into the oil filter, you know, the first path that it makes before it goes anywhere else. So let's see what this looks like. Plug that thing. So as we can see, it's pretty dry down there, so I will bump the starter over and we'll see if we get oil coming up out of there. Nothing. So that pretty much tells us that our oil pump is not pumping oil. So I have already got authorization from the customer to do whatever I need to do to figure this out. So the most likely scenario, you know, the 99.9% positive, you know, scenario is that we lost a lifter. You know, the rollers fell out of a lifter and they dropped down into the pan, you know, and the pickup screen is actually large enough for those needles to get sucked up and they get right up in the oil pump, and it fits in an aluminum housing and it scores up. I mean, they can go through the teeth, but generally they, you know, they go through the edge of the back edge of it and they'll score up the back of the oil pump, you know, and it's machined in there. And it's machined in such a way to where, you know, it's a pump, so it's designed to draw oil out of the oil pan. And, you know, once you screw that up in there, score it up in there, it's not going to pump oil anymore. It won't prime itself. So, you know, I'll go ahead and take some things off the front here, pull the dampener, pull the cover off the oil pump, and I'm pretty sure we're going to find some damage in there. And then while I was cranking it there, I was listening. I heard a little rattle, you know, sounded pretty high in the engine over here on this side. So, and for some reason, most of the time when I see a failed lifter, it's always in the back. It's always, you know, usually number 5 or 7, or sometimes 6 and 8 on the other side. And I'm not really sure why that is, but that's where I find failed lifters most of the time. Unfortunately, to get those lifters out, you have the branch tube that comes into the back of the engine that feeds your high pressure oil rails through the standpipes. You know, you either have to pull the transmission out if you're going to fix it in the truck, because you need to pull that rear engine cover off. So the easiest way to do this, there's a couple of options. You know, you could short block it depending on what kind of shape the engine's in. This one here, I mean, it runs good. I'd have to look at the bearings and stuff in it, but if you were to reuse this, you would want to take the engine apart and you'd want to clean it. You'd want to clean the inside of it. You'd want to blow the oil galleries out, you know, all of that, clean the pan out, clean as much of the interior of the engine as you can, because under the high pressure oil pump cover, there's kind of a shelf in there, and oil can sit in there, and a lot of times I'll find those needles, you know, when you've had a lifter failure in the back, it'll flip them needles up on top of that, so they'll just be sitting in there. I mean, I don't know if they would ever float out of there, but when the oil's hot, they might move around and they could potentially get out of there and get back down in the pan. So, you know, you want to make sure that you clean these things out really good. And the other thing too, if it's been going on long enough, you know, the roller lifter becomes a solid lifter, and it's basically grinding on the camshaft, so it'll take the camshaft out. So camshafts for these, for a factory one, they're expensive. You know, they're $900 or $1,000. So you know, you want to, if you're going to fix one that way, you want to make sure that you clean everything inside the crankcase area of the engine. Make sure that it's perfectly clean. And you know, first you need to determine if the engine is actually worthy of doing all that work on. I think this one is, but I need to, because it's been pretty well maintained. It is 177,000 miles, but you know, it's a fleet truck and they maintained it. Of course, it gets crap driven out of it, but that's a fleet truck for you. You know, that may be what we do. We may short block it. We'll have to determine that, you know, once I get it tore down a little bit and I can see the inside of it. But either way, the engine is going to come out, because that's the easiest way to fix it. If either way I'm going to do it, it has to come out. But the first thing I'll do is I'll pull the dampener and, you know, make some room in here and pull the oil pump cover and just verify that that's what happened. But I'm pretty sure that happened. So when I get that off of there and you know, I'll pull the gears out and we'll inspect the cover. I'll get that on video and then we'll go from there. But this is going to be a project for sure. So anyway, I'll come back when I get this thing tore apart. So I'm back. We've got our 2006 F450 with the 6.0. It was a no start. I suspected the oil pump, we lost a lifter, so I tore the oil pump out of it, and here's what it looks like. So see if you can see that. See the damage on the gear. You can see that something went through the pump, chewed the teeth up pretty good on it. Also on the inside, it doesn't look nearly as bad, but it's got some little dents in it here and there where the needle was hanging out and went through. Front cover, this holds the gears in. We got a scratch here, which isn't good. And then in the housing, see if we can see what that looks like. Yeah. Freaking camera. Well, that may be too bright to see. Get my other light here. So right up there on the top, you can see a scratch right there. And that's where a needle was hanging out of the G-rotor teeth and went through there. So this is where your oil comes up out of the pan right here. Goes down into the, attaches to the block. There's a hole in there. Goes down to the upper oil pan, which has a channel in it, and then the pickup tube sits down in the sump. It attaches to the upper oil pan. So when these gears turn, it pulls the oil out of here, pressurizes it going through the gears and puts it out on this side here, and it comes up right here and goes into a hole in the block. Then there's a channel in the block, and it comes up and goes right up to the oil filter housing, and then it drops into the high pressure oil cover up there, and does its job, feeds everything that it needs to feed. So looks exactly like a lifter went through it, or a needle roller out of a lifter. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull it apart and see what other kind of carnage we have, and try to evaluate whether this engine's worth restoring or whether we want to do a short block. Either way, it's not going to be cheap, but if we can fix this one, get all the metal out of it. I need to cut the filter open. I'm going to see what kind of metal we have going on in the oil filter, and evaluate it and see which direction we want to go. Talk to the customer about it. I'm not sure how they want to use the truck anymore. Is it just going to be a backup truck? But they do need it fixed, so we'll do whatever makes the most sense for them, and whatever the internals of the engine tell us. We're going to have to look at the bearings, but it will have to be thoroughly cleaned out. So that means pretty much, well, a camshaft is, you could probably put a camshaft in without pulling the crank. You could probably lift the crank up, if you had it orientated right. I'm not sure how that works out. I've never done it. You may be able to do the camshaft just by lifting the crankshaft out a little bit, leave the pistons and everything in. I've never done it that way. I've always had them completely disassembled, but if we have to completely disassemble it, it may make more sense to do a short block. So we'll see how this works out. But either way, I'll get it all on video so people can see how these things, what they look like inside and how to put them together and all that. So anyway, thanks.